I am back with another case study. This is another sponsored video. The Cult of Madoff, Bernie Madoff, financial cult leader. So let me read a little bit about Bernie Madoff before I get into his chart. Bernard Lawrence Madoff was an American financier who was the mastermind of the largest Ponzi scheme in history, worth about $64.8 billion. He was at one time chairman of the NASDAQ stock exchange. Madoff's firm had two basic units, a stock brokerage and an asset management business. The Ponzi scheme was centered in the asset management business. Madoff founded a penny stock brokerage in 1960, which eventually grew into Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. He served as the company's chairman until his arrest on December 11, 2008. That year, the firm was the sixth largest market maker in S&P 500 stocks. While the stock brokerage part of the business had a public profile, Madoff tried to keep his asset management business low profile and exclusive. At the firm, he employed his brother Peter Madoff as senior managing director and chief compliance officer, Peter's daughter Shana Madoff as the firm's rules and compliance officer and attorney, and his now deceased sons Mark Madoff and Andrew Madoff. Peter was sentenced to 10 years in prison in 2012, and Mark hanged himself in 2010, exactly 2 years after his father's arrest. Andrew died of lymphoma on September 3rd, 2014. All right, so a lot of you people probably have already, heard about this Ponzi scheme. I mean, it's one of the biggest in history, and he got caught in 2008, right while the economy took a major dive. So this video has been sponsored by Kawaii Honey. Thank you for sponsoring another video. So Kawaii wants to know, what aspects in Bernie's chart made it easy for him to evade authorities in the beginning of his Ponzi scheme? So I'll get into the aspects that deal with that. You also ask, can you tell more about Taurus at the 8th degree? So his sun is at the 8th degree of Taurus, and that makes him Saturnian with respect to his approach to money. So he's very shrewd, calculating, very much about trying to be as successful as possible when it comes to money, finances. And that 8th degree of Taurus is great for business, and it's a big reason why he was so successful, even though he was defrauding his clients. That 8th degree also pertains to the government. It also plays out as opportunism and exploitation. It is also a number of heavy karma. So you also said it looks like Bernie may have an unaspected Saturn. If so, what does it mean? So actually his Saturn is aspected through a sesqui-square and two semi-squares. So I'll talk about those aspects as well. So let's get into his numerology. So his birth number is 29. That breaks down to 11 and 2. So that 29 produces high pressure situations that need to be handled with grace. It also produces conflicts with women, home, race, culture, and is representative of Madoff ripping off fellow Jews. Interference from third parties, in this case, the SEC, the private investigator as well, that basically blew the lid off of the whole fraudulent operation. More about that in a minute. His life path number is 9, and that is a number of leadership. Also, endings and new beginnings, selfishness, egocentric, and conflict. So here's his chart. Good thing is I do have his birth time. He's a Leo rising, which makes a lot of sense because Leo rules investments. He has Neptune at the 18th degree of Virgo. That says a lot. That 18th degree produces conflict between the material and spiritual sides of life. That North Node is in Scorpio in the 4th house, Jupiter in the 6th in Aquarius, Saturn in the 8th in Aries, Mercury in Aries in the 9th, Moon, Sun, and Uranus in Taurus in the 9th. He has a Taurus midheaven at that 22nd degree, which basically produces a kill or be killed type of major theme in the person's life and dealing with money in particular, because we're talking about Taurus. control or be controlled. South Node, Venus in Taurus in the 10th house, Mars in Gemini in the 10th, Chiron in Gemini in the 10th, but it's actually conjoined to that 11th house cusp. Pluto in Cancer in the 11th. So his ascendant at the 28th degree of Leo. So that 28th degree can produce trusting lambs. Well, it's known as the trusting lamb. So he gained the trust of his clients and he betrayed that trust. So trust is a major theme of that 28th degree. And again, Leo rules investments and investors. So that 28th degree is very much like Leo. So it reinforces the investment theme. It can produce major come up through investments. Will ride others' coattails, basically benefiting from others' success. Children are reinforced with the 28th degree of Leo. Leo rules children, and so does the 28th degree. Also, that 28th degree of Leo makes him bold, confident, and also arrogant and narcissistic. Sun conjunct Uranus in Taurus in the 9th house. So that 9th house is dealing with speculation. It's also dealing with legalities. It's also dealing with excess, abundance, and wealth. So this conjunction made him extremely willful. It also made him a tyrannical and a bully, sociopathic. Basically, Bernie Madoff was the cult leader of finance. And, you know, I talk about Taurus being a cult leader. So he had this exclusive investment fund that he will only allow certain clients in. And that exclusivity attracted clients, you know, wealthy clients to him, especially Jewish clients. And it was like the best kept secret, at least while it was going on. So that cult leader theme is strong with Bernie Madoff. Also rebellious, huge sense of entitlement towards other people's money, with Uranus ruling the 7th house. Also, this is representative of the Ponzi scheme, stealing investors' money, Sun ruling the 12th house. So he has Leo spanning that whole 12th house. So that's the depth of his investors. A money magnet, but because this conjunction is in the 9th house, it's never enough for him. Represents Madoff being chairman of the NASDAQ exchange. On February 8th, 1971, the NASDAQ stock market began operations as the world's first electronic stock market. So Uranus rules electronics. So that's pointing to him being the chairman. Creating a financial network, inventing money out of thin air, artificial money, with Uranus representing that which is artificial. Represents Ruth, his wife's involvement, and her being the bookkeeper in the early part of his career, with Uranus ruling both the 6th and the 7th house. So Bernie Madoff has a fixed grand cross in his chart. It's involving his ascendant, the nodes, which are in Taurus and Scorpio, Venus and Jupiter. So it all began with his father. So his father was being investigated for fraud by the SEC. So he learned it from his daddy. So whatever Ralph was his father, business was, it apparently went sour in August 1963. Keep in mind that Scorpio North Node is in the 4th house. 4th house is the father, and that's pointing to the father committing fraud as well. Whatever Ralph's business was, it apparently went sour in August 1963 when the SEC began proceedings to determine whether 48 broker-dealers, including Bernie's mother, Sylvia R. Madoff, doing business as Gibraltar Securities, have failed to file reports of their financial condition, and if so, whether their registration should be revoked. So his South Node in Taurus is in his 10th house, and that's pointing to the mother being involved. This Grand Cross deals with Madoff getting caught up in the investment Ponzi scheme that went on for a number of years. And because this is a fixed Grand Cross, we're talking about many years. I believe he said like 16 years he was pulling this scheme, but it was also reported in some places that he was always defrauding his clients. So out of this fixed Grand Cross, we have ascendant square North Node, And this is his fraudulent investments that led to criminal charges, with that North Node being in Scorpio, basically robbing his investors blind. Sons turned him in. So when it came down to the wire and he confessed what he was doing to his sons, and he was trying to still make some moves to transfer funds before it was too late, his sons turned him in. So on December 10th, 2008, Madoff's sons, Mark and Andrew, told authorities that their father had confessed to them that the asset management unit of his firm was a massive Ponzi scheme. Remember, I told you that Leo, 28th degree of Leo, is reinforcing the children. And quoted him as saying that it was one big lie. Son Mark commits suicide. So his ascendant also squaring Venus and the South Node in Taurus. Investors lose money, demand their money back, which sent him into a panic. Bernie is not what you would call Mr. Nice Guy. Not someone you would want to have a beer with, one insider volunteered. He was imperial, above it all. Jupiter in Aquarius, opposition ascendant, that wicked smirk. So there was a number of people that remarked about his smirk. And that Jupiter in Aquarius, you know, I talk about Aquarius being the smirk. You got that Aquarian smirk. Jupiter opposition ascendant. Yes, and I'm expecting you, he said, his mouth pursed, and what she would soon discover was his trademark smirk. She mentioned the smirk Madoff turned on reporters. I like to crack him. Being the chairman of various boards, huge sense of entitlement towards investors. Now the boards, that's coming from Aquarius. Aquarius deals with boards, commissions, back spasms. So he complained of back spasms, especially towards the end of his life. You know, that was guilt. He loved his sons, but he never showed it, said a family friend. Mostly tough love and fear. People were afraid of Bernie. He wielded this influence. They were afraid of his temper. So Jupiter in Aquarius opposition ascendant is basically showing that he was like a bully towards his sons. Jupiter square Venus, and he was rather detached from them. Jupiter square Venus and the nodes. Conflicts of interest with being the chairman of the NASDAQ exchange. Feels entitled to other people's money. Artificial returns and yields. Being shut down by the SEC, finally, after a number of investigations. Again, this is dealing with his son, Mark, committing suicide via hanging. Jupiter is ruling that 5th house. His Venus at the 29th degree of Taurus, that echoes his birth number, is conjoined to Mars and Gemini in the 10th house. So this is where he's the mastermind of this financial scheme. And remember that 29th degree deals with high pressure situations. So especially towards the end of this Ponzi scheme, he started to become under a lot of pressure to basically keep the returns on those investments coming. So at one point, when the stock market crashed in 2008, he had some of his investors trying to get their money out. And he basically had to pay out $7 billion, and he didn't have it. And that's when he knew he was at the end of his rope. Represents his recruiters, but also word of mouth. So a lot of his clients came via word of mouth. Identifies with money and possessions, making money is constantly on his mind. Duplicity in terms of financial reporting, having 2 sets of books. Diversified funding sources. Bernard Madoff must have been a split personality, pure Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, according to Stephen Raven, the head of Madoff's London office. So that Mars and Gemini can produce like a split personality, or where you're 2 different people in one. Bernie would talk to people who were as rich as he was, but he didn't want to be bothered with the little people. That's very much that Venus conjunct Mars and Gemini. Also with this conjunction, the most relentless skeptic was Harry Markopolos, an accountant and private fraud investigator, mostly unknown outside of Boston, who repeatedly sounded the alarm about Madoff to the SEC starting in 2000. When the SEC took no action, Marco Polo began a crusade to prove his point. In 2005, he sent regulators a 19-page memo entitled "The World's Largest Hedge Fund is a Fraud." So this conjunction is showing that Harry was on Madoff's ass. So Harry is being represented by this Mars and Gemini, and that's basically where he's looking into Bernie Madoff's finances, his affairs. He's trying to figure out how he's able to continue get these returns for his clients, even though the market is basically very volatile, going up and down. But Madoff was, getting consistent gains year after year after year. He was referred to the New York branch chief, Megan Chung, who he wrote in an email to one of her colleagues last year, didn't have the derivatives or mathematical background to understand the violation. That Mars and Gemini is also representing his mathematical background, much less prosecute them. The SEC eventually opened an investigation into Madoff, but closed the matter in November 2007 without bringing any claims against him. Chung, 37, who left the SEC last September, had difficulty defending her findings in the Madoff case, telling the New York Post after his arrest, "If someone provides you with the wrong set of books, I don't know how you would find the real books." Marco Polos, who lambasted the SEC in a congressional hearing in February, said, "I felt like I was an army of one." That was Bernie and his wife, Ruth. More about her in a minute. So he has Mercury in Aries square Pluto in Cancer. So this can produce a corrupt or reprobate mind, not for everybody, but most certainly in his case. Fraudulent information, fraudulent reports and statements, erasing, shredding, purging files, preying upon his own people, which is represented by Pluto in Cancer, the Jews, which results in being hated by them. They probably spit at the mention of his name. Next came an ugly wave of anti-Semitism. It had opened up Pandora's box, said one society leader. It took decades for the Jewish community to get past this thing, and now Bernie Madoff took our trust and raped it, said Borovitz. He took advantage of every vulnerability because he knew our vulnerable spots. Bernie was quiet, not a storyteller, not a conversationalist, said Carmen. This can cause somebody to be very closed in terms of communication, and where they got to really carefully watch what they say. If he didn't like the conversation, he would just walk away. It was, "I'm Bernie Madoff and you're not." So that Mercury in Aries will cause someone to just walk away if they're not getting their way, or if they're not getting through to someone in a conversation. So that Mercury square Pluto in Cancer is representing people feeling offended by his communication style, and where they just feel like they can't connect with him, and where the conversation has to be on his terms. So also with this square, at the meeting, he changed. He was still charming. This is one of his potential investors. But he did not tolerate my style of many questions, she said. He would try to change the subject by saying that I was lucky to invest with him. Look at the returns, he told her, and talked to some of his clients. But Goldman felt that she needed specifics. She knew almost everyone in the options business, she said, but she couldn't find anyone who was trading with Madoff. I found that strange. So this square is representing people becoming suspicious, including this woman. She asked him about custody issues, types of accounts, and Madoff came up short on everything, especially his auditing firm. 2 people in a 13 by 18-foot office in the sticks outside of New York. I'm saving a few pennies on the auditors so I can give my clients more return, she said, Madoff told her. Why, she asked. Wasn't he set up like a typical hedge fund, which takes a 2% management fee and a 20% of the profits? He told me, I'm making up for the lower fees by attracting greater volume. He added, Jews like a discount. So here's Bernie with his wife, Ruth. Now, Ruth tries to feign innocence, and she tried to act like she didn't know what Bernie was involved with for all those years. I call bullshit on that, especially when you take into account some of the placements in her chart. So Sun conjunct Moon and Taurus in the ninth house. So this caused him to take a totally subjective approach to life where only he and his family matters. That Moon is what's producing that subjectivity and the personalization where nobody else matters. Ruth is a Taurus. So that fits well with that Sun Moon conjunction in Taurus. She was born on May 18th, and that 18 can produce conflicts between the spiritual and material side of life, conflicts involving money, and it can make one quite ruthless when it comes to money when we're talking about a 18 Taurus. And she was blowing through money like it was no tomorrow. According to one observer, Ruth allegedly did not allow her husband to travel alone for more than one day. She didn't let Bernie out of her sight. That's representative of that conjunction, her being very possessive over him. She was director of Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. That's dealing with that conjunction. Ruth Madoff was spending $59,000 a month before Madoff was arrested. So she was trying to, she must have knew that, the clock was running out. So she was trying to make the most of that stolen money as much as she could. All of his family members grew up with this being our lives, the Madoff's elder son, Mark, then director of listed trading, said in a 2000 interview. When it is a family operated business, you don't go home at night and shut everything off. So you take things home with you, which is how all of us grew up. Mark, who was 44, and his more reserved brother, Andrew, 42, were the heirs apparent, both trying to carve out a place for themselves within their father's daunting shadow. So that's pointing to that conjunction, especially with the sun representing his children. Now, just look at her. First of all, you could just see in her face that she's no dummy. And she looks like, again, she could be very ruthless. She can be very, what's the word? She could be a money grubbing bitch, basically. I don't believe for 1 second that she didn't know what was going on. So Mercury and Aries conjunct Moon and Taurus in the ninth, representative of Ruth having some knowledge of her husband's financial affairs, up until the very end, if you ask me. So this also points to Bernie Madoff ruling over his family with an iron fist. Also about Ruth, she worked for some time as her husband's bookkeeper. A Vanity Fair article stated that during the time when she was a bookkeeper, employees in the London office stated Ruthie runs all the books. She was a director of Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities. So the securities is represented by that Moon and Taurus, but also his wife's involvement, and Mercury is pointing to the books and how there was just one sole person overlooking the books, which happened to be his wife. Now, she later stepped down, but come on, if she started off with Bernie doing that, you know that she was constantly looking at those books, or she had knowledge of the fraud, of this Ponzi scheme. She used to be a stockbroker. I mean, come on. Now, she was splashing $57,000 a month. Now she has to log any purchase she makes that is more than 100. This is after Bernie Madoff got arrested. After her husband was sent to prison, Ruth Madoff sought to avoid being recognized in public, even dyeing her hair red as she tried to avoid people recognizing who she was. That Mercury and Aries is representing the red, and where she was trying to hide her identity. So more about this conjunction. He was very insistent that we did everything by FSA, Britain's Financial Services Authority guidelines, she continued. Everything was by the book in the UK office. And he wanted to make sure, as it says in his brochures and on his website, that his name was on the door. His name was the most important thing. That Mercury and Aries is representing his name. The second Madoff family is headed by Bernie's brother, Peter, a lawyer and computer whiz. So this is representing Bernie's brother, represented by Mercury, being involved in this business, who was 7 years his junior. Peter became senior manager of trading and compliance director, but he and his two children, his daughter, Shayna, a rules compliance lawyer for the trading division of her uncle's firm, and his late son, Roger, a Bloomberg News business writer who joined the firm before his death. In 2006, were strictly second-tier Madoffs, working for the company but owning only a very small part of it. Peter could never live up to Bernie. But Bernie rarely made a move without his brother. So that Mercury conjunct moon is showing his close ties with his brother. Peter would watch over Bernie's ass. Peter is much more religious, more even keeled. Bernie is more cocky, arrogant, a showman, shrewd like a fox. The minimum required to get into the fund was up to Madoff. This is very much dealing with this conjunction as well. There was never a fixed number. It was subject to a person's individual wealth. As they spoke, the man realized that Madoff had already sized them up and calculated their net worth. He said, "Your minimum to me is 10 million. Not prepared to open with that much, they declined. We were pissed, but there was no bargaining. It was what it was. And if you couldn't handle it, it was tough shit." So that's one of the accounts from one of the guys that wanted to invest with Bernie, but Bernie turned him down because he couldn't come up with that 10 million. Here's Ruth back in the day with one of her sons living a good life off of the backs of other people. Moon sesqui square Neptune in Virgo, keeping his wife and family in the dark regarding his activities. Now, I do believe that she didn't know everything that was going on, but she knew enough to know that he was basically doing this Ponzi scheme. But it was really his sons that I believe really didn't know. They might have suspected, but they didn't know for sure. Represents his wife's statement about her and Bernie trying to commit suicide by taking a bunch of Ambien, which I believe was a lie. Pleasant, charming, but reclusive, said one. When I would talk to him through his wife, well, wait a minute, it says, when I would talk to him though, his wife would look down at the table. And all the years she knew me, she never spoke to me. So you could either look at it where his wife was that much of a snob, or maybe it was guilt on her part. Other people assured me, however, that when Madoff was away from the mob groveling for entry into his fund, he was the opposite of the quiet, kindly smiling Uncle Bernie who presented to the world. According to some close observers, he ruled his family by fear. In view of the fact that Madoff looted so many charities, it is therefore interesting to note that his own favorite charity, the Lymphoma Research Foundation, did not invest in his fund. So here's Madoff with his two sons. Moon in Taurus, sesqui square Neptune in Virgo. More about this. He reportedly has a major case of obsessive compulsive disorder and is an anal retentive neatness freak. That's that Neptune in Virgo influencing that moon. Julia Fenwick, the manager of Madoff's London office, told me. The offices in New York and London were almost identical, starkly modern in shades of black and gray, and everything in them had to be perfectly in place. A messy desk, scratches or scuffs on furniture, even an undrawn window blind could drive Madoff crazy. He installed 2 cameras on the trading floor of the London office so that he could monitor it from New York. And he had a video conferencing camera ripped out of the office wall in London because he couldn't stand the circular shape of its casing. And Neptune is ruling the 8th house, which causes him to be obsessive compulsive about being neat and orderly. Also, this aspect is dealing with him just dealing with paranoia of being caught. This conjunction, this quote right here points to this as well. It was a brand new plane and he was maniacal about keeping it pristine to the point that his brother, Peter, told me, "You can't put your luggage with metal edges on that seat. Bernie will kill me," she said. Since Madoff surrendered to authorities, he has been under house arrest in his Manhattan penthouse awaiting indictment. So that points to that sesqui square as well. So Madoff had a yacht in his chart involving his Scorpio North Node, Chiron in Gemini, and Mercury in Aries. So this is representative of Madoff's exceptional ability to remain unaffected by the bear market conditions, but that it aroused suspicions at the same time. Madoff's bold, self-serving plan blows up in his face. In New York, Rabbi Mark Gellman wrote in an open letter to Madoff in Newsweek about the pain he had inflicted on the Jewish community. Keep in mind the North Node in Scorpio is in the 4th house. 4th house is dealing with ethnicity, race, culture, his own people. There must be some new word invented to describe the way you have refined betrayal. Rabbi Mark Borovitz a reformed scamster and alcoholic himself, whose Los Angeles foundation lost between $200,000 and $300,000 to Madoff, called Madoff's crooked style Affinity theft. That's very much dealing with that North Node in the fourth, in which the con man preys on the idea that you could trust your own people, whether it's Latino or Black or Jewish or Christian. Everybody wants to trust their own. That is so true. Bernie Madoff took our trust and raped it, said Borovitz. He took advantage of every vulnerability because he knew our vulnerable spots. The one thing we could all agree on is that we should curse the Madoff bloodline. That's that North Node and Scorpio in the fourth. And I believe they did too. Roger Madoff, Bernie's nephew, wrote in Leukemia for Chickens. The most relentless skeptic was Harry Markopolos, an accountant and private fraud investigator, mostly unknown outside of Boston, who repeatedly sounded the alarm about Madoff to the SEC. So while Markopolos is represented by that Venus-Mars conjunction, it's also taking place through this yod. It's showing the resulting effect as a result of Markopolos blowing the whistle. All right, now Bernie Madoff had Pluto in Cancer, trine Scorpio North Node, and his Pluto was also forming a sextile with his Taurus South Node. So this trine and sextile enabled him to operate undercover in the financial world for quite a while. So this trine and sextile is a big reason why he was able to get away with the fraud for so many years. Having pool with the Jewish population represented by Pluto and Cancer, since he's a Jewish man and Cancer deals with one's race and culture, he easily gained their trust. The allure of being part of an exclusive group. So the exclusivity is coming through that Scorpio North Node of financially savvy folks drew people in. So again, Bernie Madoff was on the hush hush in terms of his securities fund, his financial management group, where he only allowed select clients in. So that gave it allure, that exclusivity. So that attracted some very wealthy clients because they thought that they were getting the one up. While the stock brokerage part of the business had a public profile, Madoff tried to keep his asset management business low profile and exclusive. This is very special, what I am doing for you, Levy told Carmen. So this Levy, Norman Levy, was a good friend of Bernie Madoff. He was actually like a surrogate father to him and a mentor. So Madoff actually betrayed his friend and was stealing from his own friend. So Levy had a girlfriend, Karma Della Orifice. I can't really pronounce that name, but she is a stunning model. And she's been modeling since, I think, like the 40s. I mean, she's a veteran in the modeling world. If you Google her image, she is just absolutely stunning. Even at her old age, she is so beautiful. So she had a boyfriend, Norman Levy, who was really good friends with Bernie Madoff. So basically, this quote is about that. So she said, "This is very special what I'm doing for you," Levy told Carmen, indicating what an honor it was to be admitted into Bernie's exclusive fund, which, while usually not as high as other funds in an up market, never lost in a down market. Its 10 and 12% annual returns were totally dependable. So one day, Norman Levy, who was the boyfriend of Carmen, he gifted her $100,000 to invest in Bernie Madoff's fund. And she ended up losing all of her savings as a result. So this sextile and trine, especially that Pluto trine Scorpio North Node, points to his prime real estate. Being admitted into the Palm Beach Country Club gave him more access to potential clients. Now, this Palm Beach Country Club didn't just allow anybody in. Like, they had really stringent requirements in order for you to be admitted into this country club. Her detractors said that there could be no question whatsoever about Madoff's integrity because he had been chosen by a man considered to be a god amongst the Jewish communities of Palm Beach and Boston, Carl J. Shapiro, a wealthy philanthropist of epic proportions. So I believe Carl Shapiro, who was one of Bernie Madoff's very first investors, he invested $100,000 with Madoff back in the day. I believe he was in on the whole Ponzi scheme, but he ended up losing a lot of money too. He probably thought that the gravy train would continue to go on and on. I smirk again. So Bernie Madoff had Neptune in Virgo, trine Uranus, and midheaven in Taurus. So this points to him being an astute financial manager, financier, a master thief, carrying out the perfect Ponzi scheme, fake financial statements, fake trades, but being meticulous with it, with the Neptune being in Virgo, cooking the books, fraud with Neptune ruling the eighth house, ability to deceive others in the financial world through compartmentalization. That's the Virgo influence of duties and workers. Madoff had his suits tailor-made at Kilgore on Savile Row in London. So that points to that. Even though Madoff didn't drink, he knew that Norman, again, his friend, very good friend, Norman Levy, Norman loved good red wine, so he meticulously planned wine tasting tours. That word meticulous is Virgo all day. So he meticulously planned wine tasting tours for him. He knew where all the vineyards were, and he arranged for Norman to do these excursions into the countryside. Everything was about Norman. Also, Madoff owned a 55-foot, 17-meter sport fishing yacht named Bull. So Bull, he's a Taurus the bull, but Bull also stands for bull market. That's when the stock market is doing very well. And, that all ties back to Taurus. And in front of the New York Stock Exchange, they have a statue of a bull. Here's Bernie Madoff during his younger years. Jupiter in Aquarius, trine Chiron and Gemini on the 11th house cuts, fabricating the numbers and statements, inventing a diversified investment fund with Jupiter ruling the 5th house, satisfying the SEC's inquiry through providing bogus records, having friends in high places, such as the SEC, expert at playing golf, but could have been cheating. So some of his friends said he was really good at playing golf, but one of them mentioned, well, he could have been cheating since he was cheating about everything else. At a 2007 Business Roundtable meeting, Bernie Madoff bragged about his very close relationship with an SEC regulator, adding, in fact, my niece even married one. And that's pointing to that Chiron and Gemini that's representing his niece. Once after Levy's health began to fail, Madoff arranged for a helicopter to transport him for medical treatment. So that's pointing to that as well. The biggest pyramid scheme in history. Says right here, the false Madoff statements representing what investors believe they own was a total balance of approximately $64 billion. In a series of payments obtained through legal action, victims have recovered $9.16 billion, more than half of the $17.5 billion reportedly invested in the Bernie Madoff scandal. So here's a big part of this issue. So Bernie Madoff has Capricorn intercepted in the 5th house. Saturn, ruler of Capricorn, is in the 8th house at the 11th degree of Aries. That 11th degree produces conflict and interference from third parties. But this basically is showing that his approach to investments was purely selfish. And this is why I like using Placidus house systems, because it will generate intercepted signs in the houses, and it'll let you know that there's something special going on with that sign and house. So this is about him defrauding his investor clients. 5th house is investments, and with Saturn being in the 8th, that's the fraud right there. Jewish investors in particular. So Capricorn rules the Jews. So that's where that comes in. Capricorn intercepted in the 5th house. He's getting a lot of his investment money through his own people, Jewish people. Laura Goldman, now of the Tel Aviv-based LSG Capital, told me she had met Madoff at the lunch counter at Green's Pharmacy in Palm Beach in 1992. when she was a broker with Payne Weber in Philadelphia, visiting South Florida in search of clients. When I fortuitously bumped into Madoff, I thought I'd find my lottery ticket. As soon as the name Bernie Madoff floated across the counter, she knew who he was, the Jewish T-bill. Saturn in Aries, sesqui-square Scorpio North Node, semi-square Venus, and the Taurus South Node represents the irony of his name, Madoff. Basically, made off with people's money. Diverting funds represents his fraudulent investments, especially in terms of robbing Peter to pay Paul via new investors. Saturn rules fifth house via intercepted Capricorn. Now, all the money that he was getting from the investors was going into his Chase account, his business Chase account, which is very much that Saturn in Aries. So it was all going to him. And whenever an investor would request a payout, he would just withdraw money from his bank account. But after a while, it got to be where he couldn't sustain it anymore. Represents the trouble his father found himself in with fraudulent activities. So again, he gets it from his father. Represents the discovery of fraud by Dew, who was hired to try to find out how Madoff continued to realize investment gains. And also this is representative of the search and seizure of his assets by the US government. Also, this is showing that Madoff felt that he had no choice but to admit guilt. Basically, he had no way out. And it can also show that he was the one that took sole responsibility. Even though I know that there were other players involved, he chose to be the fall guy. And this was his Ponzi scheme, but there was people in his life that facilitated it. Or you could say, look the other way, such as officials in the SEC. Saturn in Aries, semi-square Jupiter in Aquarius. He was no friend of anyone's, really, because that Saturn in Aries is producing extreme selfishness, and that's getting in the way of him being a good friend. Ruining friendships over selfish motives, the ability to keep the SEC at bay, at least for a while, due to his power and influence. An unreasonable man who will go to extremes to get what he wants. Refuse to allow his sons to develop in their own independent way, with Jupiter ruling that fifth house is children. Fear of making their father angry kept his sons in line, at least for a while. One of them rebelled and turned his father in, and then his brother basically joined him in on that. So he has a mini grand trine in his chart that consists of his Leo ascendant, sextile Chiron in Gemini, Mercury sextile Chiron, and Mercury trine ascendant. So this is where Madoff is coming highly recommended in the investment world, always attracting new investors, especially via word of mouth, teaching his sons, running the show without outside interference, at least for a long while. Jupiter in Aquarius quincunx Pluto in Cancer, putting some of the properties in his sons' names, but also making his sons jump through hoops to get money for homes. I saw the movie featuring Robert De Niro and Michelle Pfeiffer. It's called The Wizard of Lies. It's available on Amazon Prime. Actually, I had to get the free trial from Cinemax in order to watch it. But it wasn't bad. It was kind of slow moving, and I wish they would have, did the movie more in a chronological format. But it was pretty good because it did shed some light on who Bernie Madoff was as a person. Attempts to keep his son's sense of entitlement in line or in check through threats of disowning them or through withholding support, kept his sons in the dark regarding his private fund. So again, I believe that Ruth Madoff, Bernie Madoff's wife, knew exactly what her husband was doing. She may not have known all the ins and outs, but she knew that he was committing fraud. But I strongly believe his sons did not know. They might have suspected their father of being shady or low down in some way, but it does look like Bernie Madoff really kept his sons in the dark. Represents the pressure his sons were under, resulting in Mark committing suicide. Represents Madoff's disloyalty when it came to members of his race/culture. The ends justify the means approach, even when it came to his close friends, believing he's better than most people. Inability to form real bonds with people. came across as someone who lacks a personality, cold, detached, unfeeling, psychopathic. He didn't have any interest. So that's a sign of a psychopath, somebody that doesn't have a personality. They really don't have any interests of their own. They're like shells of people. And that's who Bernie Madoff was. He was like a shell of a person. Even when I look at his face, I'm not seeing someone who's fully human. It looks like he's wearing a human mask that's covering up a monster. It's safe to say he had a very limited circle of friends in this community. He didn't participate in a lot of local activities. He kept pretty much to himself. So he had Mars contraparallel Asclepius, and this points to his disease, cardiovascular disease, atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. That points to that because Aquarius rules the cardiovascular system, the veins, the arteries. Moon conjunct Arachne, creating a private fund and a network of funders. Moon conjunct Diana, being on the hunt for more clients. Mars opposition Estrella, taking things too far. Also choosing to admit guilt rather than facing a long, drawn out trial. Because in the trial, probably more would have been revealed that he didn't want to come out. Jupiter contraparallel Fortuna, going after his friend's fortunes, or his life could have been on the line if he would have chose to go to the trial, take this to trial, because they would have subpoenaed a lot more people. That could have cost him his life, because you know how these people get down. Going after his friend's fortunes, Jupiter contraparallel Fortuna, Neptune contraparallel Juno. Wife Ruth maintains his secret, is granted some mercy by the judge, allowed to retain some of the wealth. So Ruth was able to retain $2.5 million of their money, which I believe was not right. I believe she should have been stripped of everything because she knew. Neptune conjunct Nemesis, taking the blame. Uranus parallel Siwa, being a money magnet, an artificial financial existence. Friends only exist for his financial benefit. Mercury contraparallel Sophia. Sophia means wisdom. So this is where he's very clever and skillful, very wise when it comes to financial matters, choosing to use his wisdom, skills, and intelligence for selfish purposes. Pluto conjunct Tisiphone, being judged and punished harshly. Saturn parallel Valentine. I found this out, that he pursued one of his client's wives just because he didn't like the client. I was like, wow, that's dealing with that all day. Mars opposition Vesta. People entrusting all their savings to him, including charitable foundations, duplicity in the process of being a guardian or steward of people's fortunes. So let's get into some of Bernie Madoff's fixed stars. So his moon conjoined to Sheraton. Sheraton is a star that can manifest as violence, defeat, accidents, injury, danger, but honors. Moon parallel Ras Al Ghethie. This is a star that produces fixity of purpose, and he definitely had that. He was basically set upon defrauding his clients, stealing from them, strength of character, art in nature, and dangerous passions. Mercury conjunct Vertex, merciless, uncaring, dispenser of punishment, weakness. Venus parallel Sheraton, violence, defeat, accidents, injury, danger, honors. Venus conjunct Alcyone. This can manifest as ambition, honor, glory, but it can bring trouble with the opposite sex. It could pertain to homosexuality. And I did wonder if Madoff had a romantic relationship with his two best friends or one of them, but I don't know. Disgrace, bereavement, loss, sorrow. And I'm saying this because they were just very, very close and he would do anything for them, but it could be because he owed them a lot. And I do believe one of them, at least Carl Shapiro, was in on the Ponzi scheme. Mars conjunct Prima Hiatum. This star can manifest as scandal, violence, disgrace, imprisonment. Bringer of rain. So that could be symbolic, like somebody's bringing the rain, the bad times. Mars parallel Ascellus borealis. Patience, beneficence, and courage. Heroic and defiant leader. So the heroic and defiant leader could represent Marco Polo's, the whistleblower. Mars parallel Cornephoros. Fixity of purpose, strength of character, art in nature, and dangerous passions. Jupiter parallel Giada Prima. Beneficence, peculiar events, love affairs, great good fortune. Saturn conjunct Alderman. Gravity, sternness, judgment, severe trials, drama. Uranus conjunct Menkar. This can manifest as disease, disgrace, ruin, unjustified enmities, sudden emergence of deep unconscious issues. And that statement is sudden emergence of deep unconscious issues. I see that to mean like the person's dealing with some mental health issues that are usually repressed but can rise to the surface. Uranus parallel Prima Hiatum. Scandal, violence, disgrace, imprisonment, bringer of rain. So this star shows up again through Uranus. Pluto conjunct Aludra. Good-hearted, charitable. Now, Madoff and his wife did give to charities, but that's all part of the money game. Faithful, dangerous passions. Chiron conjunct Polaris. Sickness, trouble, loss, affliction, spiritual powers. Chiron conjunct Betelgeuse. Great fortune and fame, but also associated with calamities, danger, and violence. North Node conjoined to Ptolemy. Occult and philosophical learning, self-analysis, honors, beneficence, friends, refinement, high positions, stubborn, cruel, stormy or spoiled relationships with women, and a need for freedom. So we know that once he got locked up, this star was activated because he wanted out. And he tried to appeal a few times. He tried to reduce his sentence. He tried to get out early, but these attempts were unsuccessful. North Node parallel Castra. Destructiveness, uncontrollable temper, malevolence. North Node parallel Crab. This star deals with the jewel and riches, materialism, power, honor, transitory wealth, meaning wealth that doesn't last, malevolence, mercilessness, fiendishness, repulsiveness, malice, theft, crime, pestilence, contagious diseases. Most of that applies to Madoff. Ascendant conjunct Regulus. Regulus is one of the most fortunate stars in the heavens. It can manifest as nobility, ambition, alertness, great power, status, leadership, but it can also bring forth one sudden downfall, which Madoff definitely experienced: accidents, violence. Ascendant conjunct Vecta. It can produce a civilizing influence, transmission of divine knowledge, bloodbaths, assassinations, riots, sexual perversion. I wouldn't be surprised if he did have some sexual perversions, because he is basically a twisted, psychopathic type dude. But the assassinations, again, I wouldn't be surprised if he decided not to go through with a trial, because that could cost him his life. Because once a case goes to trial, then they're going to open up Pandora's box, and some of the people that were involved might be summoned, and yeah. So I wouldn't be surprised if he was fearing for his life, and that's why he decided to cop. Midheaven conjunct Zarak. Melancholy, fear of death, and suicidal tendencies. Midheaven conjunct Capulet. So the suicidal tendencies, Ruth, his wife, did say that they tried to commit suicide, but I think if they did, it was a weak attempt. They both woke up with not really any strong effects of the pills that they took. Midheaven conjunct Capulet. Primitive male sexual energy, penetrating, ruthless, adventurous dishonesty. Midheaven parallel Ascellus Australis. Mass murder. So this is more so in Madoff's case, mass financial murder, and he is referred to as the financial serial killer. Horrors, self-willed, uncooperative. Neptune could join to the Arabic part of inheritances. So he was the guardian of a number of charitable foundations. So Neptune is ruling the charitable foundations, and in Virgo, that's him being the guardian. Neptune could join to Arabic part of profession. So Neptune rules thieves. So this is him being a thief for a living. Secrecy, lies, and deception involving his profession. South Node could join to the Arabic part of marriage. Karmic connection with wife. And this makes me think that his wife was totally compliant because this conjunction is in Taurus. Midheaven conjunct Arabic part of discord. Lack of cohesiveness in the office made it easier to maintain the scheme. Also, this conjunction could deal with the rating of his offices. So here's Ruth Madoff's chart. And once I saw that she had Mercury conjunct Venus and Gemini, I was like, she definitely knew that he was committing fraud for all these years. And she did work for him as his bookkeeper. That's that Neptune in Virgo conjoined to the Virgo North Node. With the Neptune influence, that's secrecy, that's theft. She basically knew what was going on. She may not have known all the details or wanted to know, but she knew that her husband was committing fraud and she was benefiting immensely from it. That South Node in Pisces can make her prone to lie, make her prone to cheat, make her prone to steal. She also has Moon conjunct Mars in Pisces, which is basically akin to keeping her man secret. And also that's her, living that lavish, lush, spoiled life. And then as you can see, Ruth Madoff's Sun, Jupiter, and Uranus are conjoined to Bernie Madoff's Venus and South Node in Taurus. So that's reinforcing that karmic connection involving money. Her Venus is conjoined to his Mars. And that's, again, showing that she had knowledge of what he was doing. She knew very well the man she was dealing with. But she has a lot of people convinced that she didn't know. But she doesn't have me fooled. So let's get into some of the major transits that were taking place on December 11, 2008, when he got arrested. So transiting Pluto was forming a quincunx with his Venus. So these entries are taken from my book on planetary transits. And I picked out the ones that apply to his case. So being pressured to give in, a rift is created between you and your partner, acrimony, sour relationships, being under investigation, being audited, attempting to hide money or something of value, attempting to cover up evidence, a case of fraud, manipulation, infiltration, exposure, the seizure of assets, a lien is placed on an account, an inability to access your money, being cornered, people are ganging up on you, coercion, being jerked out of your comfort zone, a period of financial insecurity, a shakeup, persecution, people are turning against you, your safety is in jeopardy. Your back is up against the wall, receiving threats, being outnumbered, being overpowered, being in dire straits. A loss of appetite, a change in eating habits or food choices, which we know that he experienced because he ended up having to spend some time in jail. I think it was only a couple of nights, and then Ruth ended up bailing him out. The scales are not tipped in your favor, seedy or filthy conditions, lower back pain. The transiting North Node was forming a sesqui square with his Chiron, receiving a penalty, being reprimanded, an abnormality, a need for an out-of-the-box solution, refusing to conform, going against custom, facing a formidable challenge, time to execute a contingency plan, plans fall through, a situation that upsets the status quo, a situation evokes bad feelings or bad memories, receiving a stern warning, feeling threatened, a need to exercise extreme caution, dealing with a delicate matter, a conundrum, a time of great uncertainty, being in a strange or foreign environment, receiving a calling to do something extraordinary, but some pain is involved. An event that leaves you feeling awkward or out of place, circumstances lead to a great deal of insecurity, breaking away from an old way of life, an impractical solution. A circumstance prompts you to implement some necessary changes, being ill prepared, things fall apart, a need to exercise prudence. So here's that model I was talking about, Carmen Delorfis. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. But like I was saying, stunning beauty. She was one of the ones that lost all of her life savings to Bernie Madoff. And she was the girlfriend of one of his best friends. Transiting Chiron quincunx Neptune. A sorrowful event, crying spells, a painful sacrifice, enforced isolation. A painful event triggers addictive tendencies, being lost, bewilderment, insomnia, disturbing dreams, being hypersensitive, feeling cheated, being in a vulnerable position, a bizarre occurrence, feeling helpless. Being at the mercy of draconian measures, imposed confinement, imprisonment, being quarantined, being on lockdown, a major mishap, losing something held dear, a problem with medication or prescription. He was probably complaining when he got locked up that he couldn't get his medication. Discombobulation, someone is preying upon your weakness. Here's Ruth looking all distraught, but that's what she gets, because again, she knew full well what was going on. Transiting Uranus opposition Neptune. A friend is in need, unusual circumstances, a sudden loss, attempting to recover or recoup what was lost. A friend is at risk of dying, a period of unforeseeable consequences, a change in terms of dreams or vision, being in a vulnerable position, being enticed to do something that could lead to regret, an attraction is waning or fading away, the erosion of your present way of life. Bizarre or weird dreams, receiving premonitions, intuitive powers are very keen, receiving psychic visions or messages through dreams, a surreal experience, being very impressionable, and it could be to your detriment. So that could be when he was being investigated and they were, trying to offer him a plea deal. He probably thought he was going to get off light, but ended up getting sentenced to 150 years. Being out of it, being in a weakened state, an amazing experience, a need to be very discerning. An offer or opportunity comes with strings attached, avoidance, being evasive, especially with respect to a friend or associate. So that basically concludes my reading on Bernie Madoff. Thank you very much, Kawaii Honey, for sponsoring this video. I really enjoyed conducting the research and watching some of the interviews and also watching that movie, The Wizard of Lies. Check it out. Like I said, it's kind of boring and slow moving in parts, but you could pretty much get the gist of how Bernie Madoff was as an individual from watching that film. I just wish they would have made it in a more chronological format. But anyway, the moral of the story, the astrological moral, I guess you could say, is greed. And you could see the greed with that Taurus stellium in the 9th house. He was, born with karmic debt involving money with that South Node in Taurus. And then the money is reinforced with Venus conjoined to the South Node, posing that Scorpio North Node. So he did rise to the challenge of the Scorpio North Node, but he just did it in an evil way because Scorpio is the sign of fraud. So this just shows that you could embrace the North Node, but still be doing wrong. You can always take that North Node too far. You can always take it in the wrong direction or whatever, or channel it into negative or nefarious deeds. Again, with him being a Leo rising, that's investments. And that's basically him keeping the investment money for himself. Leo, 0 degree of Leo, starting that 12th house, is spanning the whole 12th. That's him stealing from his investors. That's him basically being a crook, being a cheat, and where he's betraying his investors' trust. I mean, this chart is very clear. And then that Capricorn intercepted in the 5th house. Capricorn rules Jews. And he had a lot of Jews investing with him. And he basically took advantage of that fact that, that affinity theft is what they called it, where he's taking advantage of his own people because they just naturally trust him. So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments section about this video. And I will be back with some more. Please like, share, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I'll be back with some more videos. Peace.